New York City in the summer of 1986 was a metropolis defined by its extremes. It was a city navigating a complex era of economic booms and rising crime rates, a place where immense wealth existed just blocks away from profound struggle. Within this sprawling urban landscape, the Upper East Side of Manhattan stood as an enclave of affluence and privilege. It was a world of elite private schools, exclusive social clubs, and a culture where the youth often operated with a sense of invincibility. It is within this gilded world that a tragedy unfolded, one that would shatter the illusion of safety, expose the dark underbelly of privilege, and forever change the way the American justice system and the media treat the victims of violent crime. This is the story of Jennifer Levin, a bright and vibrant young woman whose life was cut tragically short, and the relentless investigation that dismantled a carefully constructed facade to uncover the truth. To understand the profound impact of this case, one must first understand who Jennifer Levin was. 18 years old and glowing with the promise of the future, Jennifer was a beloved daughter, a cherished friend, and a young woman on the cusp of a new chapter. She was preparing to leave the familiar streets of New York to attend college, carrying with her the aspirations and dreams typical of someone stepping into adulthood. Those who knew Jennifer described her as fiercely loyal, outgoing, and possessed of a radiant energy that drew people to her. She was deeply connected to her family, and her presence brought warmth to their lives. Her story is not merely the preamble to a criminal investigation, but the narrative of a life filled with potential, a life that deserved to be lived fully. The tragedy of her loss is the anchor of this entire investigation, a constant reminder of the human cost of violence. The events that would lead to this devastating loss began on the evening of August 25, 1986. The social hub for many of the private school youth in that neighborhood was a local establishment known as Dorrian's Red Hand. Located on the Upper East Side, it was a place where teenagers and young adults gathered, often blurring the lines of legal drinking ages in an era where enforcement in such affluent establishments was sometimes notoriously lax. The atmosphere was one of youthful exuberance, a closed social circle where everyone knew everyone else, or at least knew of their reputations. Jennifer Levin was at the establishment that night, socializing with friends, enjoying the waning days of summer before the academic year began. Also present was 19-year-old Robert Chambers. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, articulate, and undeniably handsome, Chambers was the quintessential image of the Upper East Side elite. He had attended some of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the country, moving in circles of wealth and influence. However, beneath this polished exterior lay a troubled history. Chambers had struggled academically, had been asked to leave multiple institutions, and had developed a well-known history of substance abuse and petty theft. Despite these deeply concerning behavioral patterns, his charming demeanor and social standing often shielded him from significant consequences. He was a young man accustomed to maneuvering through life on the strength of his appearance and his background. As the night stretched into the early hours of August 26th, the paths of Jennifer Levin and Robert Chambers intersected. Witnesses at the establishment would later tell investigators that the two were seen talking and interacting. As the establishment prepared to close its doors, Jennifer and Robert were observed leaving the premises together. They walked out into the warm, late summer night, heading westward toward the vast, shadowed expanse of Central Park. The dawn of a new day in New York City brings a unique quiet to Central Park, a brief respite before the bustling energy of the city awakens. Shortly after sunrise, a cyclist making his way along the paths near the Metropolitan Museum of Art noticed something unusual in the landscape. Behind the museum, in a slightly secluded area, the cyclist made a discovery that would initiate one of the most highly publicized homicide investigations in the history of the city. He found the lifeless body of a young woman. The New York Police Department was immediately dispatched to the scene. The first responding officers quickly secured the perimeter, an essential protocol to preserve the integrity of the environment. In any death investigation, the scene itself is the primary witness. Detectives from the local precinct, alongside specialized crime scene investigators, arrived to begin the meticulous process of documentation and evidence collection. The clinical observations made in those early hours are critical. Investigators noted that the victim had sustained fatal injuries, with clear indications of a physical struggle. The surrounding foliage was disturbed, and items of clothing were found scattered nearby. The methodical nature of crime scene processing requires patience and precision. Every inch of the immediate area was photographed, sketched, and analyzed for trace evidence, ensuring that no potential clue was overlooked. The immediate priority for the detectives was identification. The victim carried no identification, but the unique nature of the tight-knit Upper East Side community soon provided answers. As news of the discovery circulated, the pieces began to fall into place. The young woman was tragically identified as Jennifer Levin. The notification of her family is a moment of unimaginable grief, a profound shattering of their world that would propel her father, Stephen Levin, into a lifelong journey of advocacy. With the victim identified, the investigative machinery of the NEIPD shifted into high gear. Detectives worked backward from the moment of discovery, meticulously retracing the final hours of the victim's life. Canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing friends, and reconstructing the timeline are the foundational steps of a homicide investigation. It did not take long for the focus to narrow on Dorrian's red hand and the social circle that frequented it. Through a series of interviews, a consistent narrative emerged. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Jennifer had left the establishment in the company of Robert Chambers. He was inevitably the last known person to see her alive. Armed with this critical piece of intelligence, detectives proceeded to Chambers' residence. When they arrived, they found the young man asleep. As they began to question him about his whereabouts the previous night, the seasoned investigators immediately noticed something highly suspicious. Chambers' face and neck bore fresh, deep scratches. In the context of a homicide investigation where the victim clearly engaged in a struggle, such marks on a person of interest are a massive red flag. When asked about the injuries, Chambers casually offered an explanation that would soon become infamous. He claimed that the scratches were the result of an encounter with his cat. This initial statement, a clear attempt at deflection, did not deter the detectives. Chambers was asked to accompany them to the precinct for further questioning. The transition from a residence to an interrogation room is a deliberate investigative tactic. It removes the suspect from their comfortable environment and places them in a controlled setting where detectives can systematically dismantle inconsistencies in their narrative. During the interrogation, the psychological dynamics between investigator and suspect are paramount. Detectives utilized a combination of rapport building and confronting Chambers with the emerging timeline of the evening. They knew he had left with Jennifer, and they knew his explanation for his injuries was highly improbable. As the hours passed, the pressure mounted. Recognizing that his initial story was unraveling, Chambers altered his narrative. He admitted to being in Central Park with Jennifer. He admitted that she had died while in his company. However, he constructed a defense that would shock the public and ignite a firestorm of controversy. Chambers claimed that her death was a tragic accident, the unintended result of consensual, albeit rough, physical interaction. He alleged that Jennifer had become aggressive, causing him pain, and that in his attempt to push her away, he had accidentally caused her fatal injuries. This statement, captured on videotape, was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It moved the case from a question of who was responsible to a question of intent and the nature of the act. To the seasoned detectives and the medical examiner, Chambers' explanation was not merely implausible, it was entirely contradicted by the physical evidence. The forensic pathology of the case became the undeniable voice of Jennifer Levin. The autopsy, conducted by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, is a rigorous scientific process designed to determine the precise cause and manner of death. The findings were clinical, objective, and devastating to Chambers' narrative. The medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to compression of the neck. Furthermore, the specific pattern and severity of the injuries indicated a prolonged and forceful application of pressure. The forensic evidence showed that the victim had fought desperately for her life, resulting in the defensive wounds that had left the deep scratches on Chambers' face. The physical evidence at the scene, the condition of the victim's clothing, and the undeniable medical findings painted a picture of a violent struggle, absolutely refuting the claim of a momentary, accidental reaction. Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence, the case was about to enter a new and highly volatile phase. The arrest of Robert Chambers, the handsome, privileged prep school graduate, for the death of a young woman from the same elite circles, created a media frenzy of unprecedented proportions. The tabloids quickly coined the moniker, the Preppy murder, splashing the faces of Jennifer and Robert across front pages day after day. What followed in the media and the broader societal conversation was a deeply troubling phenomenon that highlighted the profound flaws in how the public consumed true crime in the 1980s. Rather than focusing solely on the forensic facts and the loss of an innocent life, a significant portion of the media narrative began to fixate on the victim's character. Defense strategies, often leaked or implied in the press, sought to paint Jennifer in a negative light, suggesting that her behavior somehow contributed to her own demise. This strategy, known as victim blaming, was a common, albeit deeply unethical, tactic used to deflect responsibility from the perpetrator. It placed the victim's history, her social life, and her personal choices under a microscope, effectively putting her on trial alongside the man accused of ending her life. The Levin family, already enduring the agonizing pain of their loss, was forced to watch as their daughter's reputation was subjected to relentless and unfair public scrutiny. This secondary victimization is a trauma that many families of violent crime victims face, but the sheer scale of the media apparatus in New York City amplified the pain exponentially. Yet, amidst this storm, the prosecution team was meticulously building a case rooted in science, evidence, and the law. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office assigned Linda Fairstein to lead the prosecution. Fairstein was a pioneering figure in the legal field, known for her expertise in prosecuting crimes of violence against women and for her deep understanding of the complex dynamics of such cases. She recognized the defense strategy for what it was, an attempt to distract the jury from the indisputable medical evidence. The defense was led by Jack Litman, a highly skilled and aggressive attorney known for his controversial but effective tactics in high-profile cases. The stage was set for a monumental legal battle, not just over the fate of Robert Chambers, but over the fundamental right of a victim to be treated with dignity in a court of law. The trial commenced in early 1988 in the state Supreme Court in Manhattan. The courtroom was packed every day, with reporters, the public, and the families of both the victim and the defendant. The atmosphere was charged with tension. The prosecution opened its case by laying out the stark, undeniable facts. They presented the timeline, the initial lies told by Chambers, and most importantly, the testimony of the medical examiner. Through detailed clinical explanations, the prosecution demonstrated to the jury that the injuries sustained by Jennifer Levin could not possibly have been the result of a brief, accidental struggle. The forensic science spoke with absolute clarity, detailing a timeline of events that aligned only with intentional harm. The defense, however, aggressively pursued its narrative. Litman sought to introduce elements of Jennifer's personal life, fighting to include her private diary as evidence, attempting to establish a pattern of behavior that would lend credence to Chambers' story of an aggressive encounter. This tactic caused widespread outrage among victims' rights advocates and the public, highlighting the glaring lack of protections for victims in homicide trials. While rape shield laws existed to prevent the introduction of a victim's sexual history in sexual assault cases, no such explicit protections existed in homicide cases, allowing the defense significant leeway to attack the character of the deceased. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on all involved was palpable. The prosecution systematically dismantled the defense theories through expert testimony and rigorous cross-examination. They highlighted Chambers' history of deceptive behavior, his varying accounts of the night, and the physical impossibility of his final narrative. Yet, trials are human endeavors, subject to the unpredictable nature of a jury. After closing arguments, the case was handed over to the jury for deliberation. What followed was an agonizing period of waiting. Days turned into over a week. For 9 days, the jury debated the evidence, grappling with the legal definitions of murder versus manslaughter. The burden of proof in a criminal trial is the highest in the legal system, requiring guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence, the defense had succeeded in planting seeds of doubt in the minds of some jurors regarding Chambers' specific intent to cause death, a necessary element for a second-degree murder conviction. The jury eventually sent a note to the judge indicating they were hopelessly deadlocked. A mistrial seemed imminent. For the prosecution and the Levin family, the prospect of a mistrial was a devastating scenario. It meant starting the entire harrowing process over again, subjecting the family to another agonizing trial, another media circus, and the risk that a second jury might also fail to reach a unanimous verdict, or worse, acquit entirely. Faced with this agonizing reality, a difficult legal compromise was reached. In consultation with the Levin family, the prosecution offered a plea deal. Robert Chambers would plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter. In the state of New York, manslaughter implies causing the death of another person without the premeditated intent required for a murder charge, but with the intent to cause serious physical injury or acting with a reckless disregard for human life. In a highly emotional courtroom scene, Chambers stood before the judge and admitted his guilt. He admitted that his actions were reckless and that he had caused the death of Jennifer Levin. The judge sentenced him to a term of 5 to 15 years in state prison. The resolution of the trial brought a sense of finality, but it was a bitter justice. The sentence felt deeply inadequate to many who had followed the case, a stark contrast to the permanence of the loss suffered by the Levin family. However, the conclusion of the criminal proceedings was not the end of the story. The legacy of Jennifer Levin and the aftermath of the trial would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Robert Chambers entered the New York State correctional system, but his behavior behind bars demonstrated a continued disregard for rules and authority. During his incarceration, he accumulated numerous disciplinary infractions, many related to substance abuse and contraband. These infractions extended his time in prison, ensuring that he served the absolute maximum of his 15-year sentence. When he was finally released in 2003, any public notion that he was merely a tragic figure who had made a single terrible mistake had long since evaporated. His post-release life further solidified this reality. A few years after his release, Chambers was arrested and convicted again, this time for running a significant drug operation out of his apartment. He was sentenced to a lengthy term in prison, confirming the deeply ingrained patterns of criminality that had always lurked beneath his privileged exterior. Conversely, the legacy of Jennifer Levin became one of profound positive change, driven by the unimaginable strength of her family. Her father, Stephen Levin, channeled his grief into relentless advocacy. He recognized that the justice system had deeply failed his daughter, not just in the final verdict, but in the way she was treated throughout the process. He fought tirelessly for victims' rights, working to change the laws and the culture surrounding high-profile trials. The outrage over the defense tactics in the Chambers trial became a catalyst for legal reform. It sparked a national conversation about the rights of victims to privacy and dignity, even in death. Advocacy groups pushed for the expansion of legal concepts similar to rape shield laws, arguing that a victim's personal history should not be weaponized in a homicide trial to justify the actions of the perpetrator. While legal scholars continue to debate the balance between a defendant's right to a fair trial and the protection of the victim's character, the Preppy murder case undeniably shifted the moral compass of the legal community. Judges became more stringent about what character evidence was admissible, and the media began to face greater scrutiny and criticism for engaging in victim-blaming narratives. Furthermore, the case served as a critical educational moment regarding the realities of intimate partner violence and the myth of the perfect victim. It demonstrated that violence does not only occur in dark alleys among strangers, it can happen in the most privileged of environments, perpetrated by individuals who hide behind a veneer of respectability. It highlighted the importance of forensic science in giving a voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves, proving that physical evidence remains the most reliable narrator of the truth. Today, when we look back at the events of 1986, the sensationalism of the Preppy murder moniker fades, leaving behind the stark reality of the tragedy. We remember the meticulous police work that refused to accept an easy lie. We remember the forensic experts who deciphered the silent testimony of the evidence. But most importantly, we remember Jennifer Levin. We remember her not for the tragic way her life ended, but for the enduring impact her story had on the pursuit of justice. Her legacy lives on in every courtroom where a victim's dignity is fiercely protected, and in every piece of legislation designed to ensure that the focus of a trial remains squarely on the actions of the accused. The case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about society, privilege, and the justice system. It strips away the illusions we often construct about safety and character based on outward appearances. It demands that we look deeper, relying on facts, science, and a fundamental respect for human life. As we reflect on the meticulous investigation, the harrowing trial, and the long road to reform that followed, we are left to ponder the delicate balance of our legal system. When a defense strategy relies on dismantling the character of the deceased, and when a jury cannot agree despite overwhelming scientific evidence, we must ask ourselves a vital question. In our relentless pursuit of a fair trial for the accused, how do we ensure that we do not sacrifice the dignity, the truth, and the ultimate justice owed to the victim?